Well, my next guest reckons loan restrictions for first-time home buyers have been a devastating failure. And he says instead of calming the market, they've created a perfect storm where investors have been able to snap up houses that might traditionally have been bought by Kiwi families. So what do we do? Ashley Church, Chief Executive of the Property Institute. Good morning.
Good morning, Hilary.
Why has it been a failure?
Well, we've been talking about some solutions over the last 3 or 4 weeks, and what's happened over the last 5 or 6 days is that the Statistics Department have come out with some numbers that have demonstrated that 78% of renters, that's about 458,000 households, have net equity or net assets of $120,000 or less. And the reason that that's significant is that the LVR restrictions that were brought in by the Reserve Bank about 18 months ago dictate that the purchaser of a home needs a 20% deposit. That means that those people with $120,000 or less of assets are actually unable now under this policy to buy a first home. That's an absolutely devastating failure. It means that we've effectively closed out a generation of people that would previously have been able to purchase a home.
And 120,000 is a lot of money, but when you're looking at an average price in Auckland,
even more,
for example,
200 grand.
You need 200 grand because it's $1 million now to buy a house.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's cutting a lot of people out of the market. What do you think is the solution?
There's 4 or 5 solutions, of which one is the removing the LVR requirements on first-time buyers altogether. We talked about 3 or 4 more. There's things like increasing the rates on land that's being land banked by mum and dad investors. But also, it's probably really important to understand, Hilary, that the main issue here is around supply. It's not around people investing in property. So the thing that we really need to do is we need to move people who are currently putting money into the investment of property into existing dwellings into purchasing new property, increasing supply. And so the way to do that is to make it very, very difficult for anybody except first home buyers to purchase existing dwellings, and very easy for those people, including first home buyers, to buy new dwellings in order to increase supply. And the sorts of things that are in place at the moment simply aren't moving in that direction.
And what do you think the chances are of the Reserve Bank dropping the LVR?
It depends on what happens over the next 6 to 8 months, I think. This is becoming a highly politicised issue for the government, and I think that although the government doesn't have a remit with respect to the operation of the Reserve Bank, I think there's a growing awareness, I just saw some figures the other day, that this is something that's going to have to be addressed over the next 6 or 12 months, and we're going to have some real issues in the marketplace. So I think what's probably likely to happen is that the Reserve Bank, if it sees this problem continuing to happen, is going to look seriously at the possibility of removing, only in respect of first-home buyers, those LVR restrictions.
Yeah, they're the ones that are being completely cut out of the market.
Correct.
It must be, such a tough thing to be going through when you've got, so as you say, 120,000 in the bank and you still can't afford to buy a house.
Absolutely, and I think the thing about this that's probably the most puzzling is if there had been a good reason to do this, and you need to go back to and remember why the Reserve Bank put these restrictions in place in the first place. And they talked early on about doing it as a way of cooling the housing market and slowing down house prices.
That didn't happen?
Didn't happen, no. And so they moved that narrative and that dialogue about 12 months ago and started to say that it was about protecting the market, so that if there was a correction in the market and prices reduced, that those folk would be protected by the fact that they had to have a bigger deposit and more equity in the home. The problem is that there is simply no indication or very little likelihood that that correction is going to take place. And the history of the market going back almost 50 years demonstrates to us that the Auckland market goes up and then it tapers off. It goes up and then it tapers off. That's what's likely to happen again at the end of this downturn. The end of this boom. So the problem with the policy is that if you take that into account, what we're dealing with now is a huge monetary experiment on the part of the Reserve Bank that's impacting on a generation of first home buyers that are unable to buy a house.
And you would say, time for it to be over, that
Absolutely.
experiment. Ashley Church from the Property Institute of New Zealand, thank you.
Goodness me, the feedback is pouring in over the rugby player let off assault charges. Why should it